In cities across the United States, there has been political unrest for what feels like an eternity. It is late November in 2020, less than a month after a contentious election. Many people in the United States feel like we're living in an unprecedented era of division and bitter political divides, or at least the largest divide in recent memory. And that may be true. Just look at the presidential debates between President Donald Trump and now President-elect Joe Biden. They quarreled and interrupted and steamrolled over each other the entire first debate, and for a subsequent debate, Donald Trump refused to participate in a virtual format, and both candidates held separate town halls at the same time, forcing Americans to choose which candidate to watch and which candidate to miss out on. That feels like an appropriate metaphor for the political scene in the US right now. Supporters of the two candidates have been sparring across the country, including in my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky. That soundbite from the beginning was actually from a local event. I had a lot of questions about the interactions I've been seeing here in the city where I grew up. I wonder about the politics of disagreement and partisanship, especially when it comes to how it affects community ties. But before I delve into all that, let me back up for a minute. My name is Rachel Crick. I've lived in Lexington my entire life. I'm straight, female, white, cisgender, and I come from a middle-class background. I'm a registered Democrat, although I usually would use the word progressive to describe my political affiliations, and I'm almost done with my senior year at the University of Kentucky, where I'm studying journalism and sociology. I felt the need to disclose this information about myself because, as you'll come to see, I believe one's identities can play a large role in their understanding of and interaction with the world. Let me tell you a story. I was driving home from my morning shift at the gym where I work one day in early October. I was stopped at a traffic light when I saw an unusual sight. In front of me, 7 or 8 cars and trucks flying Trump flags sped by. The flags were attached to antennas, being held out sunroofs and passenger windows, and there was a lot of honking. I thought it was strange, but I didn't really think too much of it until a minute later when another 4 or 5 vehicles proudly sporting Trump flags went past, blaring their horns. All the way home, I kept seeing an inordinate amount of Trump flags on vehicles. There were people honking in solidarity, and there were people honking angrily, slamming their hands on their horns, and whether it was in protest of their driving or the flag they were flying, I don't know. The soundbite my podcast opened with was recorded during this Trump parade and the counter-protest. Later that weekend, I found an article discussing the events of the day, discussing the Trump parade and the counter-protests organized against it. It was hardly the first clash I'd seen, and I'd also been noticing some other interesting sites like political sign vandalism and stealing, but I thought it was an unusual sight for Lexington, which leans heavily blue. This got me thinking about the nature of politics in cities like Lexington, especially in our current world of partisan divides. Blue cities located in very red states. Lexington has been rated one of the best places in the U.S. to be gay. The crosswalks by the courthouse are painted with rainbows, but Kentucky belongs to the Bible Belt, where religious conservatism thrives. Lexington is a decent-sized metropolitan city with a population of over 300,000, but most of Kentucky's residents live in less urban and more rural areas. It's these contradictory elements of its makeup that got me thinking about politics in Lexington and in cities like it. I wanted to design a research project that answered questions such as, how do national politics encourage division within Lexington? How do conflicting identities within the Lexington population contribute to a lack of civil discourse in politics? How can Lexington as a city encourage collaboration, cohesion, respect, and civility when tackling locally politicized issues? What community-led efforts could bridge the partisan gap within Lexington? And how do one's political beliefs affect one's pride and sense of solidarity with one's community? Given the current state of the world, with restrictions related to COVID-19, studying this issue using a hands-on participatory action research, also known as PAR, project that will bring people in the community together simply won't be possible. However, incorporating elements of PAR into my research to delve into this issue a little further absolutely is, and that's what I've done here. By conducting interviews and combing through Herald Leader archives and social media, I've attempted to bring the community into this analysis as much as possible, to observe not as an outside researcher, but as someone who grew up here and cares about my community. So, let's begin. The first thing I want to do with this project is explore the dynamics of Lexington. What makes it unique? What makes it like other places in the U.S.? And how do these features lead to the divisions that I'm seeing? To better understand Lexington's political scene and see how locals see it, I interviewed 3 people.
So my name is Christian Motley. You know me through the time I spent this year running for City Council in the 8th District in Lexington. In my professional life, I work for an organization called Strive Together, which is a national nonprofit based in Cincinnati. They serve as a network hub for about 70 communities around the country who have made this particular kind of commitment to building cradle-to-career infrastructure for young people to improve outcomes and close disparities, specifically racial disparities.
My name is Erin Fannin. I am 21. I grew up in Lexington. I currently go to UK and I study theater and arts administration. I am a liberal.
My name's Ryan Weilage. Spent 21 years in the military, both the Navy and the Army. Married, very conservative, which means I believe in small government and the Constitution. I used to be a Republican, but I kind of have a distaste for the whole party system at this point. And currently work at a bourbon distillery, which is very Kentucky of me.
Based on some of my own research, I knew some of Lexington's unique features were in its various industries. As Ryan pointed out, the many bourbon distilleries are one of them. Horse farms are another prominent industry. Additionally, the many universities located in Lexington and the college sports that go with them are another. These things make up the culture of the bluegrass that we all know and love. But when discussing some of the factors that influence Lexington politics, one of the major divisions that all my interviewees noted was the difference between urban and rural spaces. While doing preliminary research, multiple scholarly journal articles cited the urban-rural divide as a key factor in partisan differences, with more rural areas leaning Republican and more urban areas leaning Democrat. But how does that translate to Lexington? As Christian Motley points out, there is a large population within Lexington that originates from smaller towns in Kentucky from more rural areas, and this affects how political candidates on both sides run their campaigns and approach the people.
You know, here in Lexington, you get a lot of candidates who, like, even in Lexington, you won't have candidates who perform in the same way that they do in Louisville. When I say perform, not necessarily electorally, but just the way that they present themselves. Josh Hicks, he presented himself as, a guy from Fleming County. His first video was at his house on the farm. Lexington has this interesting distinction of, number one, I think, just having that horse culture and that equine culture from way back. But then also, if you look at housing migration, you have a lot of families and individuals who move from eastern and south central Kentucky to Lexington to maintain a lot of that, a lot of cultural identity that really is, a little bit rural.
But there is still a really big divide. There still is a lot of conservative and Republican people in Lexington. Mm-hmm. Especially, since a lot of those people probably have backgrounds that go back to rural areas.
The more larger or progressive the city, the more Democrat leaning it is, or more left leaning. Mm-hmm. It just tends to be. And the smaller, more rural areas seem to lean more conservative.
This seems to be a commonly noticed trend. More rural areas tend to skew conservative, while cities tend to be more liberal. In Lexington, if there's a bigger population of individuals from rural backgrounds, this might explain why we see both here. However, it may not be that cut and dry. A Washington Post article counters the narrative on urban-rural spaces by highlighting the ways that rural areas have shown up as Democratic voting bases this most recent election. Primarily, the bases that showed up for Biden were areas with large populations of people of color, or indigenous people. This complicates things. If it's not just about where people come from or where they live right now in terms of urban-rural divides, what other factors or identities may be at play here? Identities such as race, religion, age, gender, and class all intersect to influence one's experience of the world and can also influence the formation of our communities. I want to briefly go over a few of these identities within Lexington. If I had years to devote to the topic, I would dive in more thoroughly, but I believe even a cursory look at Lexington's demographic makeup is important when trying to map out its political landscape. Trevor Noah, host of The Daily Show, once called Lexington the city of charming racism. It's really hard to hear how his experience with one callously racist woman shaped his entire view of Lexington, but it makes me wonder how conversations about race and racism shape Lexington. According to the census, Lexington is estimated to be about 75% white, 15% black, and 17% Hispanic or Latino. Kentucky is approximately 88% white as a whole. So even though Lexington is still heavily majority white, there's a much higher minority presence here than in the rest of Kentucky. Another interesting dynamic to note is religion. It's something that I hadn't done a lot of research on prior to conducting my interviews, but it came up during the interview process quite a bit. As I noted earlier, Lexington is part of Kentucky, which is part of the Bible Belt. However, it's a pretty liberal city when it comes to social issues like gay marriage, for instance. We've had well-liked, popular politicians locally who were openly gay. We have hosted a popular Pride Festival every year for the last several years before coronavirus hit. Religion statistics for Lexington suggest that just over half of the population is religious, with the largest group identity being evangelical Protestants, followed by Protestantism in general, and then after that, Catholicism. But nearly half of the city reports being unaffiliated with any particular religious group. That may not be a direct declaration of outright atheism, but compared to the rest of Kentucky, where 76% of the adult population is Christian and 49% of adults are evangelical Protestants, this is a significantly lower amount of religious engagement in Lexington. My conversations with my interviewees, though not representative of the entire population by any means, correspond with this. Erin, a liberal voter, says her lack of religious affiliation plays a large role in how she views social issues such as gay marriage and abortion, whereas Ryan says his faith is also an important factor in shaping how he sees the world. Christian Motley acknowledges how faith leaders can be an influence for conservatives, and also how churches play an important role in community building. These two identities, race and religion, have been observed to have a strong influence or at least correlation with one's political party. While this is nuanced, it makes me wonder if one of the things that sets Lexington apart from the rest of Kentucky is its larger minority presence and its larger presence of secular individuals. These are definitely topics worthy of further study. Another theme I noticed from my interviewees was how much media shaped their perceptions of Lexington and politics in general. Apparently, many people view the Herald-Leader as a partisan news source. Ryan noted that during the time when Matt Bevin, a Republican, was governor, he didn't see any positive press coverage in any of the local media. He says he struggles to find local news that doesn't feel biased.
I love getting the local news as far as, this traffic accident happened over here and, this is what's going on and this new restaurant opened up, things of that nature. But I can't trust it being an unbiased source when it comes to local politics.
Christian Motley even acknowledges that some people view an endorsement from the Herald-Leader as a statement that one is more politically liberal. He himself was endorsed by the Herald-Leader over his opponent Fred Brown. One Herald Leader letter to the editor sums up this view quite nicely. David A. Smith suggested a voter guide that tells voters what to do in very short terms without the analysis. Quote, "Without further ado, here it is. Democrats, very, very good. Republicans, very, very bad." If he's saying it ironically, it's a criticism of the Herald Leader's endorsements, which he views as partisan. If it's not being said ironically, it is a perfect demonstration of the partisan divides and the labels of entire political sides as good or bad. Come to think of it, I can't remember seeing an endorsement of a conservative candidate in the Herald Leader. That's not surprising to me given the general disconnect between conservative audiences and mainstream news, but it's important to consider that this could affect how open locals are to receiving news from the Herald Leader and mainstream news sources. Conservative audiences might be missing out on important information about local government and politics, and that's an information disconnect that won't be bridging any gaps. Something else to note about Lexington's local politics is that all the local races are nonpartisan. This would be a good thing automatically, right? If you can't see party, you have to vote for candidates based on the merits of their proposals and policies, right? Research suggests otherwise. One study titled Party Identification and Vote Choice in Partisan and Nonpartisan Elections discussed how, in the absence of party cues, people may look for other markers to tell them who to vote for. Christian Motley's experience echoes this research.
I think it's a problem just, I think not just in my race, I think it's something that we always do. So I start with party, okay, I'm down to the nonpartisan races. I don't really know what to do. What do I know about these candidates? If you're older and white male, I might feel like you're more conservative. And if I'm white male, I might, who is conservative, it's like, okay, that might speak to my issues a little bit more.
Analyzing the attitudes that voters carry with them into the booth is important because it reveals how deeply we rely on our party system as a crutch, and how we may lean on stereotypes and assumptions about others to guess at their beliefs. So in Lexington, even if the races are nonpartisan, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're unproblematic. I've discussed the things that set Lexington apart and started to deconstruct its political makeup. But now, let's talk about the role that national politics play in creating strained discourse with our neighbors. All of my interviewees were quick to note the effect national politics play in local races. So were those who wrote to the Herald Leader in the letters to the editor sections over the years. There are consistently more opinions about presidential or state elections than local elections in every letters to the editor section prior to an election within the past 4 elections at least. When I asked Christian Motley why this is, he says that people usually start at the top of the ticket, which relates to federal and state elections, and view local elections as less important. Ryan also notes that federal politics are usually easier to keep up with, more well-known, and are also more entertaining. And, as Erin says,
honestly, I think it's because state and nationwide policies tend to be about the issues that get people fired up.
This may be a bit of a misconception, but if it is, it's one that a lot of people share. Christian Motley disputes which issues are really on the ballot when it comes to local elections.
So much of the issues that are coming up that are so important, around policing, for example, those are decisions that are made primarily at the local level. So if that's important to you and you didn't make it to the city council race at the bottom of the ticket, it's just really unfortunate. So yeah, I think there's some work to do in terms of educating folks and really working to mobilize folks and being able to have something we tried to do is to have the kind of strong campaign that could sort of educate and mobilize people to get out the vote at the same time.
As for why politics are so divisive today in general, Ryan has a theory.
I kind of feel like the party lines right now are so divisive to where they've kind of turned into sports teams. you root for your team no matter what, if they're good or bad. If they do good, if they do bad, it doesn't matter. They're your team. You root for them. And, we can't even pick out individuals and say, look, this individual is, he may have the right letter after his name, an R or D, but what he did was wrong. Mm-hmm. It's like we can't even call him out anymore.
Christian Motley adds that people typically use party as an indicator to find out who they most agree with. Additionally, identity politics and party sorting, which is the alignment of political party with one's other identities, plays a huge role, according to a Pew Research report from this year. People's political parties inform their identities and vice versa, and the lack of national role models of civil bipartisan leadership doesn't exactly help matters. This is where a lot of the conflict comes in. Ryan notes a common problem that he's experienced as a conservative where he feels demonized, although I think liberals would also agree that they too face their fair share of judgment from the other side.
A lot on the left, I'm not going to say everybody, disagrees with the right, but thinks that the right is evil. Nazis, they are completely wrong in thinking of it, and it's evil. They're racist and everything. It is so demonized that it's okay to punch a Nazi. It's okay to completely discount them and not try to understand them.
So, if these divisive national politics are not only reinforcing our differences, but also distracting from local elections by sorting us into teams, it creates an us versus them mindset, which is bad for overall community cohesion. This is a prominent theme when studying communities. The more separated we are, the more distinctions we draw between ourselves and our neighbors, the more fractured the community, and the less we can ultimately communicate with one another. When I presented my findings thus far to my interviewees about the political makeup of Lexington and asked for their help brainstorming solutions, things got a little murky. And I don't blame them, it's not exactly an easy question. Christian Motley thinks it's about the disintegration of community. Naturally, the solution to that is to reintegrate things. His solutions involve creating spaces where you can get to know your neighbor, especially if that neighbor has different lived experiences from you and looks or thinks differently from you.
That is a part of the work that doesn't get talked about, right? Those places where we perhaps come in saying we have different lived experiences. Maybe I misunderstand where you come from, you misunderstand where I come from, but we have these conversations. It's not always going to be like facilitated in that way. Sometimes it's just a matter of just like being together. Mm-hmm. If I'm, I think it's important. I'm on the Lexington board. I think it's important that people from all walks of life see public transportation as an option, not just because it's good for the environment. It's keeps cars off the road, like all these other reasons, but also because we kind of learn from just kind of being around each other.
He also suggests creating social infrastructure. This could include investing in local spaces like libraries, playgrounds, public transportation, and more. And it doesn't always have to be facilitated. Sometimes it's just having those everyday interactions with one another that can have the biggest impact. Erin has another basic suggestion.
Yeah, I think it's simply just because if you are around more people, you are more likely to hear life experiences and viewpoints that are different from your own.
Something else that may be helpful is education about city and local government. At the moment, it is a pretty closed-off and distant institution to most voters.
I could not tell you anything that the city of Lexington's government has done recently.
And the hard thing was, in this past election, was, I went through the ballot prior to, and a lot of these local people, I couldn't really find a lot about them online. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me start with my experience. That it's part of the reason I ran for city council. I'm interested in politics. I have worked at every level of government. When I chose something to run for, I chose to run for local office, in part because I believe that not only are we not paying enough attention to local office, but that's where folks are getting really shortchanged. And in Lexington, our council members have so much more opportunity to be leaders and to highlight issues and to tackle problems. And many times they just don't do it.
These powerful institutions within our government are undeniably shaping the community by not incorporating their community members into their decision-making process. The relationship between power, institutions, and community is another prominent theme of studying communities, and the case of Lexington, Kentucky is no different. Creating a political environment where the people are educated about their candidates and agendas are accessible is important because change happens at the local level much quicker. Maybe this looks like holding more frequent town halls, council district representatives spending more time getting to know their communities, pushing more information about town council meetings and decisions and the impact these have, and pushing for voter education in general. All of these suggestions and more coming together might be a step in the right direction. A step towards rebuilding communities, to coming together across differences, to bridging these gaps. It's not as easy to demonize others when you get to know them, when you find out that they're just like you in the ways that matter. They're human beings who are trying to make their way in the world just like you. But, as Ryan notes, it's often complicated. When one side is calling another evil, and people aren't listening, when you don't know who to trust for information, when you can't agree on the most basic things, and when your national leaders are pitting you against each other, that's when you get the struggles that we're all seeing today.
I mean, I've actually gotten kind of depressed lately, and I've even talked about this, that with how divided we have become, I don't know how to come back together. Because I can tell you, the pendulum is just going to swing even higher. And I think it is destructive to the country. And how do we bring people back together? I don't know at this point. It's scary.
A lot of Lexington's problems surrounding political discourse are the same problems people are facing in every area of the United States right now. National politics and the two-party system play a huge role in the disconnect we feel from our neighbors right now when they support a different candidate. A combination of identity politics, us and them mindsets, and divisive leadership at the national level are all to blame. But Lexington has a lot of issues that set it apart, too. It has a unique culture that stems from its placement in Kentucky, the makeup of its population, and its major industries. It also has a less than outspoken city council and a large population that sees its local media as untrustworthy or blatantly partisan. And there's also an issue with a lack of engagement from citizens when it comes to tackling the local issues. So, while we can't make our national leaders more civil or erase decades of partisan sorting and identity politics, what we can do at a community level may actually have an impact. If disintegration of community is to blame for this alienation between us and our differently minded neighbors, let's work on that. We can do that by creating spaces where we get to know our neighbors, especially our neighbors that are different from us with different lived experiences and different beliefs. Maybe it's an investment in more shared community spaces, such as libraries, playgrounds, and public transportation. Maybe it's making an effort to have a more accessible city council that makes its agenda more widely known to the public. People can agree on one thing today, that the current system is broken. How we're communicating with one another, especially those who don't agree with us, is not working. This podcast wasn't meant to have all the answers. It was designed to start asking the right questions. They're complex questions, and the answers I expect will be even more complex, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look for them. When I started examining my city's politics and asking what was working and what wasn't, my goal was to start the conversation and really listen to what others had to say.